Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of the lecture series at CHLR Center for Historical and Literary Research. Today we have a very special guest yet again, uh, Dr. Ranjana Saha. Dr. Ranjana Saha is currently a Marie Curie Actions co-fund Turku Institute for Advanced Studies Turku Intersectoral Excellence Scheme Fellow, and she is associated with the Department of European and World History, University of Turku in Finland. She has been awarded a visiting fellowship at the Institute of Advanced Studies in Humanities. The uni- Prior to joining TIAS, she was a postdoctoral teaching fellow and faculty member at Manipal Center for Humanities, Manipal, and a postdoctoral research fellow at the Indian Institute of Science Education and Research, ISER, Mohali. She completed her PhD from the Department of History, University of Delhi, India. Her papers have been published in the Indian Economic and Social History Review, South Asia Research, and Women's Studies International Forum. She is the author of Modern Maternities, which is also the current topic she's going to talk about. Thank you so much for being here. I'll share the stage to you now, ma'am.
Hello and a very warm welcome, everyone. I am Ranjana Saha, and I'm here. Many thanks to Vidushi for kindly thinking of me and inviting me for this Center for Historical and Literary Research video recording. And it's absolutely an honor and a delight to be here. And I'm very happy to share news of my book, Modern Maternities, Medical Advice About Breastfeeding in Colonial, Calcutta. It's published by Routledge and it's out now. So in case you would like to have a copy, please do so. So I think it's very fitting to actually start with thanks to Dr. Bishumoypathy, because he was my PhD supervisor, and this book is dedicated to him. And without his unwavering support and kindness, this book, this topic wouldn't have turned into research, my PhD research or my book. So with deepest gratitude to Dr. Bishumoypathy, I would like to begin this discussion, which is actually the first time I'm sharing about my book online. So before I go forward, I've actually made a PPT, which I would like to share with you. Vidushi, would you kindly help me with the PowerPoint? Thank you so much. Okay, so how did this entire journey actually begin? So I came across this particular Bengali journal article from the 19th century, which had a medical practitioner, a Bengali medical practitioner, actually expressing a lot of anxiety about breastfeeding and the capacity it had to actually influence child character, and how, you know, the vices and virtues together actually got passed on to the child through breast milk. So that got me thinking about Bengali advice on breastfeeding. And I also did a bit of digging. I found some work in case of Europe, some in case of colonial India, in fact, because European medical practitioners were also writing about, you know, a detailed medical criteria of how to examine a wet nurse, because they often hired wet nurses in their homes because Mem Sahibs were believed to have been, you know, completely weakened by the hot tropical climate, and therefore the wet nurse had to be hired to nurse the European infant. But I found a lacuna in terms of Bengali medical advice around breastfeeding, and therefore this book. And also, I'm very happy to share that this is one of the first books to actually exclusively focus on breastfeeding in a colonial Indian context with a spotlight on Calcutta. It has a lot of rare textual and visual materials around breastfeeding advice. I think there's about 28 illustrations in the book. And I hope that, you'll enjoy them as much as I did, working on them. So, what is my main argument? So, it's kind of within the wider umbrella argument of decolonizing scientific motherhood and child healthcare, which is what I'm working on now. And now, in this case, I look at in my book completely at breastfeeding advice. So, lactation, breast milk, breastfeeding by the mother and wet nurse, artificial feeding of infants as well, the problems associated with it, and so on. And how these were not just, biological experiences, these are also very much biocultural. They are in their historical context. They need to be seen in their historical context. And also how these were discursive entities that actually made their space in various, not just colonial, but also indigenous writings around motherhood and child healthcare. And that's what I try to actually push through. How Indian doctors, especially Bengali doctors, were talking about child healthcare, and how in that dialogue and discourse their national identities and community identities were formed. Analytical categories that I look at are gender, race, class, caste, community, and age. Age also because I discuss child marriage. And I try to show through my work actually how complicated breastfeeding advice actually was at this time. And these categories, the way they intersect with each other in such advice, how complicated actually the picture was, how, understandings of breastfeeding in different contexts, were actually not exactly what they seemed. You need to kind of dig into a bit to realize how complex they were. So I use a wide range of sources to come at this topic of breastfeeding from different angles. So rare medical handbooks to periodicals to personal correspondence, advertisements, newspapers, and so on, right through to child welfare exhibition reports. So exhibitions that discussed baby health care. Now, these also turned into week-long exhibitions around child healthcare, which came to be called Baby Weeks from 1924. I only touch upon Baby Weeks in this book because that's a substantial part of what I'm working on now. So there has to be a bit of suspense around that for now. Archives that I have visited in India, especially are National Archives of India, Delhi State Archives, in New Delhi, West Bengal State Archives, National Library, Hitesh Ranjan Sanyal Memorial Archives in Kolkata, together with British Library and Wellcome Library in London. So these are the main libraries, besides a few others, which I have been to. And it's important to acknowledge, I think, as historians, how important support from libraries and archives actually is for our work. Otherwise, I actually, wouldn't be here. It's because of the richness of these sources that I could discover with all their help. Chapterization and main themes. So these are the various chapters that are there in my book. So I thought Tropicana Milk would be quite a catchy title to kind of bring together everything that was happening in terms of what Mem Sahibs were being given advice about, how to bring up their European, infant, especially with the help of the quote-unquote native wet nurse. And this was all happening in the tropical environment of India, and I try to bring that out in this chapter. And then I go on to look at Bengali advice, especially about midwifery and wet nursing. And the figure of the Dai actually brings together these two, because the Dai was the midwife and the wet nurse, because the term Dai comes from the word Tha, which means to nurse. So that's what the second chapter is about. The third chapter goes into discovering the systematicity of scientific motherhood, how it came about, and also how Indian mothers were frowned upon for certain practices, and how to actually kind of bring Indian mothers round to modern childcare based on the clock. You know, mothers are supposed to listen to the clock and not the child's cries and go running to the child. Then there's child mothers. So the topic of child marriage, and where is breastfeeding in all of this? You know, all of this debate around child marriage and age of consent. Was there a place for breastfeeding? Did it actually concern doctors? Did it worry them? And Mother India, this book by the famous or infamous pro-imperialist American journalist Catherine Mayo, who caused huge imperialist nationalist controversy around this book, um, around child marriage practices in India. So that's what chapter 4 is about. And finally, I close with a case study around this huge exhibition that happened in Town Hall of Calcutta in 1920. This child welfare exhibition. It was called Health and Child Welfare Exhibition. So this is basically, in a nutshell, what my book is about. Now, today I won't be able to share a lot with you because we won't have the time. But what I've done is I have selected a few interesting examples which complicate matters. So complications are my favorite. So here we go. So I've selected here, for example, Himabati Sen's memoir. She was famous lady doctor. She had a licentiate medical degree. She has been extensively kind of discussed by scholars. For example, her memoir has been translated by Geraldine Forbes and Tapan Ray Chaudhary. And, we learn from these various works about her life that she was born in the 1860s, and she had a difficult life because she was married off when she was about 9.5 to someone who was 45. And she was soon widowed when she was about 10. She went on to a medical career, and she remarried and had children and so on. What has been left out, I feel, is the fact that she faced gender discrimination, not just in the course of her medical education when she won a gold medal and she was asked to step down and take a silver medal, but also as a child from none other than her own mother. So we see that, she's actually recollecting about her life. She wrote this memoir when she's about 50, and she's talking about how her mother refused to breastfeed her, and her father was very happy that she was born, but her mother wanted a boy child, and she was very unhappy and didn't want to breastfeed her. Himabati was handed over to a wet nurse from a lower caste, and she actually had her mother soften and come round, but her mother became pregnant with Himabati's brother very soon when she was about 7 months old. And therefore, thereafter, she actually did not see her mother that often. So we see how she's reflecting on her childhood, and this is something that actually etched quite prominently in her memory. And I've also discussed this in a podcast. There's a snippet about this in a wider podcast around a social history of medicine in colonial India by various eminent historians, and the link is here in case you would like to have a listen. Now, this memoir actually connects with so many different issues that I have worked on, and therefore I've selected this example actually. For example, Tonika Sarkar's work actually mentions child mothers and the romantic image that actually needs to be countered about child marriage and child wives and child mothers. The fact that, she isn't just a little lovely doll, the fact that, she didn't really have a boy husband come round. it was much more complicated than that. Newspapers were reporting other things as well, which we need to pay attention to, and so on. So that's something that comes out. Also, Himavati Sen's memoir, this reference to child marriage was a very, very significant topic which was debated about by doctors, not just colonial doctors, but also Bengali doctors. The fact that were they immature, were they premature, what was their body like? Were they ready for childbirth? Were they ready for lactation and breastfeeding and so on? Is something that was actually discussed in detail, and breastfeeding was there quite centrally in these discussions as well, which is what I try to show. So there's extensive work on child marriage by scholars like Tanika Sarkar, Mrinalini Sinha, Ishita Pandey, and so on. And to this extensive, enormous scholarship around child marriage, I try to bring in the role of breastfeeding and how it actually concerned doctors. Here, for example, we can see there are questions being asked by colonial physicians around how, is she ready? Does she have the stamina for it, as a child, wife, and mother? Then we have Bengali doctors like Walai Chandar Sen, who actually is also talking about, child marriage and when is her body actually ready, for childbirth and so on. And then he goes on to talk about these things. So this is a picture that I wanted to show you, that breastfeeding did have a place in all of this. Now, while doctors were actually against child marriage, we also have doctors who were very much trying to defend it. So here we have Jagabandhu Bose of Calcutta, who is actually using Charles Sedgwick Minow's lecture around embryology, and Minow is from Harvard University, and we see that Bose is actually making a case in favor of child marriage and in favor of how healthy offspring are born to child mothers, because of Minow's experiments on pregnant growing guinea pigs, trying to argue that there is no opposition actually between reproduction and growth of the child's body. So he makes this point in the opinion he gives against age of consent bill, which is there in the judicial proceedings. We also had doctors like Horanath Ray, who was a homeopathic practitioner, pointed out that, here in his book, here I am talking about child marriage and the drawbacks, the limitations, all the negatives of child marriage that he could actually point out. And then when it came to actually talking about the age of consent bill and giving his opinion, he contradicts everything that he writes in his book. So there is also self-contradiction that happens in the course of debates. So not just contradicting what other people have said, but also contradicting what one has argued about in their own book. So these are many interesting cases that actually come up around child marriage and breastfeeding advice and what was happening at the time around debates of age of consent and the issue of child marriage and early motherhood. Wet nursing was also mentioned in Himavati Sen's memoir. Now, wet nursing, as I mentioned, also when I discussed the various chapters of this book right at the start, wet nursing is something which was very, very central to discussions of how to mother a European infant in a tropical environment like India. And how do you do so? India being a colonial setting. Right? So often wet nursing advice has been linked to how the dye or the wet nurse, the Indian wet nurse, has been turned into a quote unquote milch cow for the empire. Now, what if I told you the twist in the story that this particular advice has been written actually by an Indian doctor, by a Bengali doctor in the 1930s? That brings in a twist in the story, doesn't it? So it's not just about colonial difference, but what I try to point out is that elements of gender, class, caste also play a huge role when we have discussions of wet nursing and breastfeeding advice to mothers. Besides this issue of wet nursing, there was also the element of artificial feeding of infants. So I've discussed various baby foods, from a huge advertisement of Glaxo baby food, which was actually baby food and a galactagogue, or material that actually promotes lactation in a mother. And this particular advertisement that I discuss appeared in a Calcutta newspaper, The Statesman, uh, during the First World War. And the caption read, it was a huge advertisement, and the caption read, "The future of the empire lies in the arms of the nursing mother." So how the nursing mother is also being used in baby foods and galactagogue advertisements. And here is lactagol, which was a galactagogue in itself, promoting lactation in mothers. And it's very interesting because the text here in the advertisement actually says that we are trying to create a normal mother who takes lactogol in order to breastfeed the baby. And this is something this advertisement is actually promoting throughout the British Empire, not just in Britain, but throughout the empire. We also have Bengali doctors like Ramesh Chandra Ray, who was a licentiate in medicine and surgery. He came up with an 8-part series on child welfare, and one of them, the eighth one, was around mothercraft, and he's drawing on experience abroad, especially around mothercraft, asking the people of the country to actually pay attention to such advice in order to get rid of the ignorance of mothers, and trying to ensure that they don't go to the quack midwife, to the untrained midwife. So here we see not just the colonizer, but also the colonized, trying to build their own community and national identities by also referring to what was happening globally. Finally, the Calcutta exhibition that I mentioned right at the start. So, the fifth and final chapter of my book is actually around the Calcutta exhibition. It was held in 1920, as I mentioned, in Town Hall of Calcutta. And here also, this appeal was there right at the start of the report. This detailed report around this exhibition, where it mentions New Zealand and the death rates of babies in New Zealand, especially because New Zealand was quite prominent on the map around child healthcare discussions globally at the time. And Bengali doctors were also picking up on it because of especially the central role played by a major mothercraft expert, Dr. Frederick Truby King, or referred to often as Truby King. About this exhibition report, you can see how the ignorant mother is entering the exhibition to look through the exhibits and the lectures and so on, but quite apprehensive here. When she's coming out of the exhibition, the back cover of the exhibition shows how she has been, in the course of the exhibition, scientized, and her confidence has increased. She's playing with not just one but two babies. Her attire has changed. She's dressed in a blouse and a petticoat with a sari wrapped around. So it shows how it's important to actually give scientific motherhood advice, disciplined motherhood advice, in order to create this educated, well-informed mother at the time. At this particular exhibition, it wasn't just medical experts, but also we have people from different walks of life, like famous Begum Ruqayyah, who's very, very famous because of her Sultana's dream. Which upset gender roles. So she also writes about child health care. Her paper, Care of Babies, which she presented at this exhibition, and she addressed the Bhadra Mahila, and she spoke about how it's important to pay notice to what happened in, say, the Anglo-South African Boer War at the turn of the century, or what was happening in the First World War. What are the lessons that other countries abroad are taking around child health care? And then she stressed on this idea of scientific motherhood, or another word for it, mothercraft, and how the duties of the mother had to be learned, basically. That was the message that she was giving. She was asking parents to pay notice to the female child and not just, starve her because she has to be, married off with a dowry, or, try to kind of hold off from child marriage, and pay attention to her education, pay attention also to learning the duties of becoming a well educated mother, a well informed mother. Famous Sundari Mohandas, he was a medical practitioner who actually also attended Himabati Sen, whose memoir I had discussed a while ago. Her, experience of childbirth mentions Das being there along with his wife, Himangini Das, who was also trained in midwifery. So Sundari Mohan Das actually has written extensively around scientific motherhood, and he also took part in this Calcutta exhibition, and he wrote this paper, Ravages of Putana. So he is actually referring to this Hindu mythological demoness Putana, who tried to kill baby Krishna, but Krishna sucked the life out of her. And Putana becomes a metaphor for a midwife who is, quote unquote, with her dirty hands, a potential danger to the mother and the baby. Also, the Indian mother who is not listening to the clock and feeding the baby at all times, listening to the cries of the baby, not the ticking clock. She is also Putana. So basically, the idea of infantile diseases and mortality, which he's calling so many infanticides here, are all linked to this demoness, because he's trying to basically express here the dangers of not listening to scientific motherhood advice. And he's actually building on Truby King of New Zealand's advice. And here I've included a clock by Truby King, his famous clock face from his book, but also how Sundari Mohan Das builds on it, makes his own clocks for the strong, quote unquote, and the weak, quote unquote, babies, is very, very interesting. So these are some of the examples that I thought of discussing with you today, because it brings out the complexities that are inherent in such advice, how they were combined with so many different issues as they were discussed. What do they bring out about constructing social histories of motherhood and child health care at this time? So, breastfeeding advice I've tried to put at the center, and then kind of look at its various kinds of ramifications, the ways that it's actually connected to so many wider things. So thank you everyone for listening. And I've also included my email address here in case your research interests coincide with mine. So it's ranjana.saha@u2.fi. And I've also put the Twitter handle here because sometimes nowadays, maybe before emailing, you might just actually prefer to look up Twitter, for example. So I've also put it there. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you.